So everything was relatively under control. A few individuals escaping the prison yard and running about beyond it, but generally unlikely to get much further due to the overall consciousness of humanity, with fear of death to keep everyone else from clambering over the fences and following them. Moving into the modern era, and the trick was then to keep the slaves far more focused on survival as conditions become harsher, less time to do much beyond making it to the end of the week and feeding one's family, with a little time for emotional indulgence, into the present day and the advent of technology, seemingly for humanity's benefit, and it seems few are arguing the point. The world we collectively experience can only be as it is if the majority agree with it, or are programmed to agree to the ideas that the experience reflects. So, with technology prevalent and becoming increasingly so, everyone is evidently in agreement with it, consciously or subconsciously, and now not only can people indulge their emotional astral selves, but the variety of how they can is vastly expanded through the utilizing of all the assorted TVs, computers, computer games, virtual reality, etc. At a time where, yes, humanity by and large has had all the experience necessary and is ready for the opportunity of superseding creation, and is far more likely to turn to mystical, magical pursuits via its intuitive nudge to do so. And we would see this around the 80s and the 90s, an explosion of interest in all things spiritual, from Wicca to shamanism and mystical teachings from the East to everything in between. This was a sure indication of humanity having exhausted all experiential avenues, especially those of an astral, thrill-seeking variety, and they were demonstrating their want to reach for something else. Evidently, this phase in consciousness was established in the 60s, in fact, or Ekankar could not have been established. Agreement was such that allowed Paul Twitchell to come onto the scene and set the foundations for the recognition of the ears. It's likely individuals lacked the consciousness to fully grasp what they sought, but agreement was enough that they had accepted something that would provide them a path to something beyond which they had always known. This is why Paul Twitchell had to use the references people were familiar with, ones of a religious or spiritual nature, or he and the guides and the ears would not have had agreement. They very likely determined the readiness of consciousness on the real side, but had to present the possibility with these older reference perspectives. Agreement sought on the real side and the other life levels, they then could enter the experience of humanity, but limited to the references of old, or they simply could not have been in humanity's experience. For many, however, they would never move beyond the babysitting old reference using days, and this opened a door for which the reptilians could take over Paul's creation and contaminate it, and the infected Ekankar reptilian centres are maintained with ease, as it is dragged then into the physical astral, the domain of feel-good emotion, and very easy to maintain agreement to anything that is based on emotional stimulation. Again, then, we can see the controllers had put down this attempted insurrection and defiance of their domination, but nevertheless they may not have been aware of Dwayne and how he was being prepared. Aware of him to an extent, but perhaps dismissing him at this point, as much of what was occurring was on life levels beyond the reptilians' awareness to see, or events beyond their scope to recognize. I imagine Dwayne's receiving of the rod of power, the symbolic assuming of his position as the new man and Paul's successor, would not have been witnessed or acknowledged by the controllers at first. They would learn of it in time, but consider the rod of power to be an actual artifact that they could assume possession of and use for their own reasons, not understanding what it actually was. Humanity was still, by and large, at a level of consciousness where they were ready for the opportunity. They still sat at a place of experiential capacity, and the controllers would watch and wait. They had sabotaged the Ekankar attempt, and netted all those still agreeing with it, as it now bound them to the reptilians. But perhaps they had overlooked Dwayne, who was about set to emerge and bring in the new wave of the Is. Interestingly enough, Dwayne emerged in 2001, and this was around the time where we would see a huge influx of technology just prior to this date. Around the millennium, we would see the sudden explosion in personal cell phones, home computers, and the black magic phenomenon that is the internet. I suggest this was no accident. The controllers hadn't realized Dwayne as a threat, maybe initially, but cottoned on fast enough, and surely scrambled to bring in this technology just prior to Dwayne making himself known. I suggest that absent of the technology, far more people would have taken up the journey of awareness, perhaps millions, perhaps far more than we could imagine. For just prior to the millennium, in the 90s, everyone was pursuing spiritual paths, chasing UFOs, and studying mystical arts. A clear demonstration of humanity straining at their chains, but with Ekankar put down, and no other alternative available, the controllers would be sleeping easy, perhaps with one slit reptilian eye open, but spring to attention as they would come to realize the threat of Dwayne, and then produce and roll out technologies as fast as they are able. Be assured, the technology that entered our experience in the Millennium Era and continues to do so is not new. It stems from the Reptilians, and they've had the technology for eons. They could have thrust it into humanity's experience at any time they chose. They may not even have had to scramble that much, as they can move beyond the idea of time and enter any part of the time stream of humanity's history they choose. Very easy then to build all the first wave of cell phones that maybe take a year to develop, then pop back a year or whenever in time and roll them out before technically, from a time perspective, they were actually created. Just in time, perhaps, for Dwayne. As I say, in absence of the technologies, I suspect far greater numbers would have listened to the new man, for the technology heralded a new era of emotional stimulation, a new variety and form never before encountered in humanity's experience, perhaps. And so now the controllers are providing new experiences for an already experience-saturated species, and we would see then how vast swathes of humanity became addicted to these technologies, the feel-good stimulation of them, the dopamine rush for every click and like received on Twitter or Facebook. The technology would net many, many humans who were otherwise ready for the opportunity of the ease. Agreement had been attained for not only the perpetuated presence of the ears and an emissary beyond Ekankar and Paul, but also that consciousness was ready to receive a pure version of it. All religion and spiritual references dropped, and direct exposure to the ears. That could not be possible without agreement to not only the continued presence of the ears, but the direct references to it, agreement and the specifics gleaned again on the real side. But alas, now these exciting and emotional astral stimulating technologies were seizing the focus and locking individuals back into their astral bodies, just as they were preparing to open the prison doors. They were slammed right back inside. Their decision to do so, yes, agreement had to be made, but the subliminal bombardment and subconscious programming to the agreement, and the technology as an added source of subliminals, certainly ensured agreement far more so. That is the sole reason and purpose for the technology, and why it continues to roll out in ever-increasing magnitude and splendour, as a means of distraction, and to cater for the emotional personal self, and ensure as many people as possible forfeit the opportunity they were ready for, by providing them more experience they didn't need to have. And I would go so far to suggest technology was designed to trap humanity in the Matrix, yes, but specifically to offset the impact of Dwayne and the new presentation, as it's very conceivable that without the sudden influx of technology at around the same time Dwayne was ready to begin, we may have seen a mass wake-up never before witnessed anywhere in creation at any time in the eons of the idea of time. And even with the technology in full flow, the reptilians cannot rest easy, perhaps underestimating the new wave and the tenacity of the new man. And so we have further distractions, theatre for the masses, world fires, and the impending rollout of 5G and mass robotization. For the fact the is still here in creation, and Dwayne can operate, and the new presentation continues to receive interest and reaches ever further across the world into the consciousness of humanity. This suggests that not only is there agreement for it, but the agreement is growing, which can only occur if agreement to it increases. And so, once again, everything that is designed to lock humanity down is to offset the new wave. The ultimate objective of the controllers has been, and always has been, to keep humanity as its slaves, and trapped in creation, with emotional stimulation generally being the key, as the controllers recognize this as the main driving force of an unaware individual, the need to chase thrills and gratify itself sexually.